Hello, everyone. Welcome to your newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with Laura Matsu and Bernhard Gunther. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about finding connection in times of isolation, which is obviously inspired by the times we live in. And before we begin this podcast, we'd just like to make a quick announcement. Our group program, Embodied Soul Awakening, we're going to be doing another round of it starting December 15th. It's a 2-month group coaching program. And if you'd like to join us for getting into some experiential exercises that are related to a lot of the topics that we talk about in this podcast, please go to the website www.awakenapply.com. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're looking for, and we hope to see some of you there.
Yeah, so finding connection in times of isolation, and that's really a big theme for this year, this crazy year. And we're only just a few weeks ahead of the elections, so who knows what's happening between now and then. But, we've just experiencing this insane, crazy lockdown since it started already like March, April, right? And it came in waves, and then in some states or in the world opened up. But now the lockdown is even intensifying more. They're talking about a second wave. And, it's really, really hard. Not just economically, that's obviously a lot of businesses are suffering under that, but suffering psychologically and emotionally, missing connection, like especially real-time connection. Yes, people at home, and we talked about the silver lining of the situation. Yeah, you're at home, you can focus on other things and, rearrange your life, be on the internet and do more research and connect with people that way. But it's very limiting and not very satisfying at all. And we're just missing human-to-human in-person connections because we're wired to connection, right? So one thing that's really not much talked about at all in the mainstream media, or in the media in general, is how many people are suffering under depression of not connecting, not being able even to connect to their family and friends, or even to their elderly parents, because they're completely shielded off in elderly homes and whatnot because of COVID and all that. So it's really, really depressing for a lot of people. And I had now a friend who works at a hospital, and she told me that the suicidal rates have increased exponentially. And so have addictions, especially alcoholism and all of that, because a lot of stuff is coming up for people which they don't have the tools to deal with, right? So we want to just talk a little bit about that to really, how can we connect more, like not only to each other, obviously, in different ways, but essentially to ourselves, to our true self. That's, essentially the bigger role behind it, because it's all about also learning to thrive maybe in solitude without isolating.
Yeah. And also, I just want to talk about why connection is so important. I think a lot of people, the thing is already before this lockdown happened, we were already becoming a very isolated society because of the tech takeover. And this kind of just pushed it over the edge for many people. Already, you see the modern Westerner, especially in Canada or North America, in America in general, they're just, they go out and they're staring at their phone, and they're disconnected from what they're experiencing in the present moment. So in my experience, it's not just this kind of superficial connection, hey, how are you? And kind of just faking the mask, because I think many of us who are listening to this podcast know that isn't actually truly fulfilling. But what we're looking for, and especially once we start doing really deep soul work, inner work, and we start to regain some sort of connection with our inner self, is we start to long for people that we can share that self to. And that really becomes apparent to us at a certain point of our journey, especially if we're on a bit of a hero's journey with our own healing. I can just speak for myself for a really long time. I had, like avoidant attachment patterns. Like I was like very much like an island to myself. I was like, I do everything myself. I make my own decisions. I don't need anyone, And that was actually a trauma response. That exaggerated independence was actually a trauma response. And many of us have those patterns, where we think that everything's okay. We can just handle our own life on our own. We've kind of dissolved this like network and community that I even had like as a child growing up. I mean, I grew up in like the late 80s and 90s, and I still remember I was able to like knock on my neighbor's door and ask them for something, or like I used to just knock on my neighbor's door, go hang out with them, Like we are wired to actually reach out to people in that way, but we've become this very isolated society, and it's happened very fast. And it's also happened with the rise of technology. And then what's happened is technology has replaced that, but it doesn't really get at our own physical and our own biology, meaning like I can feel, I can type to someone on a screen and have a kind of really nice conversation with them, but it's not the same as doing it in person. And that's because when we're doing it in person, our nervous systems are attuning to each other, and we're learning how to like regulate each other and find safety in that connection. And that just happens to a lesser extent when we're communicating on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a paradox because technology, as we know it now, has gotten us quote unquote closer. You can speak and communicate to anyone at any time all over the world via texting, social media, also Zoom and Skype. It's already a bit more quote personal than just texting. But when we message in text and tweet or message on social media, which we've gotten so used to, it opens up a whole world of miscommunication, misperceptions, projecting emotions into that are not there. And we even experience it now. We live together 24/7, but when we text, sometimes we still misunderstand each other, right? And we get upset about things because I took it the wrong way, because there's a lot of missing, like you mentioned, in interpersonal communication in person, the energetic impressions, the subtle impressions, the voice, the tone of the voice, more psychic impressions, the body, how it perceives anything that we're actually not consciously aware of, which gives us a more holistic context of connection.
Yeah.
And, when that is missing, it becomes just automatically very head-centric.
Yeah, exactly. And, just using texting as a form of communication will also highlight people's attachment issues as well. Like if you have an anxious attachment and someone doesn't text back right away, those are the people who like make up all these stories in their head. Like, oh my God, they never want to talk to me again, Or there's people who are avoidant who just don't even reply for like days at a time. That was actually, I've been on both sides of the fence, But I feel like, the tools we have to communicate globally go far beyond our actual skills in communicating, Like a lot of people, like I remember when we were doing long distance and, the ellipsis, like ... You just use that as a way to trail off a sentence, to trail off a thought.
Yeah.
And I read it as passive aggressive.
You got so upset.
Which is what many
triggered. I'm like, what the hell is going on?
Which is what many people do. But, but that's also just something that's just assumed. We assume people communicate with us in text the same way that we do, and that's actually just not the case. Everyone has a different ability to communicate in text. To be honest, most people's ability to communicate verbally actually is higher than their ability to communicate in text. Not always the case, but for the most part, and we don't understand that. We just kind of like, if we read a text with a bunch of typos, we're just like, oh my God, this person's an idiot. We make all these assumptions about a person, right?
Yeah. And then, for example, emoticons, you know me, I'm not big into emoticons. So I'm like, you're supposed to show emotions via emoticons, but you also can perceive falsely when you laugh. Is it passive aggressive or you're really laughing, and all these things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what it comes down to, the gist of the matter, a lot of is lost in translation, so to speak, via texting.
And
right?
basically the point is this is no replacement for face-to-face interaction. It's almost like face-to-face interaction has become a relic of the past. Like we would rather text or maybe Zoom, with the person. Most millennials, I hate to say it, actually just prefer to text,
Yeah.
That's even me. Like I would prefer to text a lot of people in communication, but a lot of that has to do with just our attachment patterns. And as human beings, we have a deep desire to connect to others. We want these kinds of relationships, but we're just at a loss of how to get there. We don't know, we don't have the tools to get it. And I also want to know, throughout our day, when our nervous system is functioning in a healthy way, we're going to be making bids for connection throughout the day. So we'll even just at the grocery store, like talking to the grocery person, that's a way that we're showing that we want to connect to the world, right? So we reach out for contact with others. And so these connections can either be experienced as resonance or misattunement. And what I'm seeing now more often than not in the world is a lot of people are in a state of protection. So therefore they can't connect to others because they're in fear because of the virus. They're in fear because of all the propaganda. They're just in a trauma state, right? Yet at the same time, the connection and, reaching out to others is like the way out of that. It's kind of like this catch-22, this paradox, they're in this state of trauma where they're fearful of people, want to stay 6 feet apart from people. Even after this ends, I believe that there's going to still be people wearing masks, freaked out, like in their own trauma response, right? And so it's kind of hard, as human beings, because we're trying to navigate the world and we are wired to connect. Like this is also the aspect of like how we are connected. We're wired for these kinds of relationships. Yet at the same time, we're aware we go out in the world and a lot of people are fearful.
Yeah. And then that's even more heightened, for example, with this whole COVID thing and, the whole mask wearing, which is actually at this point pretty much established if you really research even the science that masks don't do anything. They don't help. People just keep wearing them, even when officials come out and saying, yeah, we don't really need them anymore. But it's being used as a political weapon, right? And it's a trauma installment program because how can you connect when you go out and see people in masks? You don't see their facial expressions.
Yeah,
you just see the eyes. You don't see is the person laughing, smiling. You're missing a lot of impression, and automatically on an unconscious level, you become more suspicious and more protective mode.
Yeah,
right? You're less open to other people. And as you mentioned, like I have my exemption. Like I'm not wearing masks because for various reasons besides just not going along with the program. There was this one incident, for example, we were in Whole Foods and I had to sneeze. I just had to sneeze. I was itching my nose, and you can only imagine the looks I got because for simply sneezing, like, oh my God, I'm killing everyone and all of that. And there's this extreme fear frequency, or what's happened now, increasingly, we have become extremely distrustful of each other.
Yeah.
Right?
So like, how can we change that? Well, the main thing is we actually have to become wired for connection ourselves. So that means we have to be in what's called the social engagement system, which is a part of the parasympathetic nervous system. Because if we're in a sympathetic or activated state, then we're in a state of protection, So if we're in a trauma state, if we're going out in the world very fearful and stuck in our own heads, we can't actually make that connection. The only place that we can make it from is from a calm, relaxed, present, grounded state. So that's the first step really is to, notice how is the state of your nervous system? How are you handling the stress of this situation? And from that state, you will actually, it's kind of interesting how it works. Like, I forget who said it, but I remember a trauma teacher once saying how like master regulators, like they're just kind of the person, master regulators of their nervous system are the kind of person that everyone wants to be around. Like they're just really good at handling the ups and downs of life. They don't go like off on a tangent when they get triggered. They're really just in control of themselves, present, grounded, attuned to people around them. So when we become those kinds of people, ourselves, i.e., we're connected to our own body and our own self, people will actually be drawn to us because we actually help them self-regulate. So people who are in trauma states, will be drawn to us and be like, when I walk into Whole Foods here, you actually don't need a mask in the Whole Foods we go to, really. And I'm really present and calm and not wearing a mask, I notice like people will like talk to me and like connect to me and they're wearing the mask, actually they should be afraid of me, but it's actually because my nervous system is regulated and I'm not wearing anything, that they're drawn to me, So if we actually want connection ourselves, we have to become those kinds of people.
Have to embody that calmness. It's not about like, in the sense, fuck you, I'm not going to wear a mask. So I'm like going with that attitude. Mm-hmm. You may actually draw to yourselves, attract more like violent opposition in a sense,
yes.
Not violent, but just people just complaining or attacking you and whatnot, because they also respond to your inner state of being. So if you're more relaxed and just healthy, self-confident, but also compassionate and open, and not also talking, in a sense of spite, because it's very, how can I say, tempting to talk down and look down on people who are in this state of fear, who are act like Karens and who are completely covering themselves with face masks and gloves and are become very neurotic with germophobia and whatnot, but they're in an acute state of fear.
Yeah, you gotta look at those people like this is someone who's, number one, their reptilian brain is like super active, so they're in an animal state, they're fight, flight, freeze, and so we got to look at it like that. Like they can't make rational choices from that place, However, through the magic of what's called interpersonal neurobiology, if you're calm around someone like that, it's actually going to affect their own nervous system, like that's how we actually attune to each other. That's how we learn how to regulate each other. In a healthy relationship, whether it's friendship or any kind of relationship, you have two people who are actually fairly aware of their own nervous systems and can use each other as sources of regulation, And that's the real connection we're talking about. We're talking about, not just like surface level, head-centric relationship. That doesn't fulfill our soul. But those kinds of people, I'm sure you've had at least one person in your life or, one experience in your life, that person who was like really like wise and present and loving. Anytime you talk to them, you calm down. Those are like the traits of a good coach or therapist too, as well. Those are the kind of the relationships we're longing for, those kinds of connections. And those are really a life force in themselves. Like if we are able to foster those kinds of relationships in our lives through this collective trauma that we're experiencing, that will help us mitigate the impact of trauma, basically, because we feel supported by our environment.
Yeah. That's all fine and good, but then, not to play devil's advocate, but the cynics out there are like people who are just very isolated, like, yeah, I'd love to find a person like that, but I'm completely alone. People are freaked out. I can see through the lies, but everybody's going along with the propaganda, the programming, the fear frequency, what I'm going to do, And we've talked to quite a few people that have approached us as well, even our programs, who are, dealing with that. In a sense, right?
Yeah.
They don't have a partner. They're completely isolated, right? And how can we find people? How can we connect? And that's, there's no easy answer. And, what came up in this conversation is also the concept what Gurdjieff talked about, external consideration. So, we don't want to go along with the fear programming, for example, with the mask, and not just be forced to wear a mask, but, claim our personal right for freedom and taking care of ourselves, and just not wearing a mask despite the rules and regulations, so to speak. But at the same time, you don't want to deal with all the backlash, right? So a lot of people just go along with it, not to deal with the issues like that come up of the quote unquote Karens of getting that kind of attack or even authorities. But also it's important this day and age to stand up for ourselves. Because what I've noticed, it's interesting, like going back, can any store, but let's stick with the Whole Foods example. When I go in there without my mask, I see other people then in observing me, and all of a sudden they take off their masks.
Yeah.
It takes just one person, and then, or vice versa. Sometimes I was a bit insecure, and like, I put my mask on, like just a little bit over my beard. I'm just not sure. I don't want to deal with anybody right now, so I just wear it. But then it's the other, is one person doesn't have a mask on, like, hey, fuck yeah. So I'm going to also take it off. So that's how we can almost inspire each other. But going back to connection, if we don't have somebody really on an ultimate level, we want to connect to something deeply. If you're yearning for somebody to see us, right? That's really comes, especially if we haven't been seen in childhood. We need this so much.
Yeah.
Right. And ultimately, which we can dive in a bit deeper as well, ultimately it's connecting to our true self, our essence within. And the more we can connect to that, then we automatically connect to the essence of other people, like everyday people.
Yeah.
Like what gives me a lot is even connecting, I don't care what their beliefs are, but the quote unquote regular person, the cashier, not be on my phone and check out, or just have a little small talk, right? Tuning into that person, right? And just kind of like make an effort to pierce through the crust of personality. And it's possible, right? It just takes, a certain level of, of embodiment, or just attunement, so to speak, and effort and intention, to connect to like strangers.
Yeah, it also begins with a sincere desire to reconnect with your own body and reconnect with your own emotions. We can meet people who are like very like good at regulating their nervous systems and use them as a way of connection to an extent. But ultimately, we want to become those people, right? Like if you're one of those people who's really calm, grounded, and present, you will begin to be surrounded by people who are going to be drawn to you, because that's actually really rare, And in times like this too, we have to watch out, for a lot of us have a lot of beliefs about how the world is, how relationships are, how friendships are. And us actually identifying with those beliefs keep us stuck. So if you think like, oh yeah, there's no one out there, no one to connect with, no one understands me, then you're going to find that. I hate to say it. You're going to experience much of the same. However, if you leave room for the possibility, that there are people out there who want these kinds of relationships that you do, and there are, then they will find you. But we have to really question our perceptions, our beliefs, and also make sure that we don't like identify with anything that we personally believe in such a way that it isolates us from others. Because that's a really big issue that we're facing right now, which leads us to another topic, is like this intense division that we're seeing, and how people are basically like, you don't wear a mask. I don't want to be friends with you. I can't relate to you. You support Donald Trump. I don't want to be friends with you. I can't relate to you. I even saw a post the other day that says, I can't see you as a human being if you support him, because it's completely morally like wrong, and this is the kind of division we're seeing, so it's really important. And this is our work to do collectively, it's easier said than done. I mean, like our neighbors have like political signs of like something we wouldn't support on their lawn, right? But at the same time, we can't see them as like the enemy or the other. That perpetuates this problem of disconnection and isolation we're experiencing.
Yeah, that's a tricky issue right now, this divide and conquer, the political polarization, right? And people know like my stance on it, the articles I've written, but it's also that I have my views, my opinions, and what I support, but I'm also not identified with it. I don't build my identity around it.
Yeah.
Right there, which is very important. There's you can also like always pull the like non-duality card, like, oh, like I've transcended duality, I don't buy into either side and whatnot, but there can also be a bypass in terms of like a philosophical, spiritual bypass, right?
Yeah.
Because we talked about this before, I believe, or I wrote about it in my article, is non-duality. Teaching's fine and good, but unless you really live it, experience, you have basically must be enlightened, or you just approach it intellectually and philosophically.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's fine to support a line with one side, but it's just, and it goes for both sides, I have to say, right? There's definitely what we call the TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, which is completely fabricated and brainwashed by the mainstream media. Like literally people see anybody who supports Trump as a racist, rapist, white supremacist, Hitler, Nazi.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's not even objectively true. right? If you really look at Trump, and without even supporting Trump, staying objective. But you see the polarization on both sides. I mean, you see people hating on Trump, and then the other side, hating on Biden and whatnot.
Or hating on, like the social justice warriors and the leftists, which even myself, I have to deal with my own issues around that. It's been my own inner work because especially as a former social justice warrior, I've been policed by social justice warriors longer than I can remember, basically since I was a teenager and started hanging out with these people, So I get it. I get why people have such a charged emotional response to them. Yet at the same time, we don't want to see them as demonize them because they're at a certain stage. A lot of them have been conditioned by successful brainwashing. It's a huge element of it, and doesn't necessarily mean we don't make boundaries or whatever in these kinds of relationships, but we don't want to dehumanize them. And that's what you're seeing happening, I think, is your people are literally dehumanizing other people.
Yeah. I mean, it's especially, I have to say, it's coming more from the quote unquote far left towards the right, There's a lot of projections and really hateful energy, which ties into more maybe occult, esoteric topics of forces having taken over that political spectrum, so to speak. That's why I always said it is not about the classical left versus right. There's something bigger. There's an archetypal war between dark and light. Anti-divine and divine forces, but and the battle is through us. That's what it really comes down to. That we are transducers of higher energies, right? So the moment we make it personal, that's when we get into tricky territory.
Yeah,
and it's still about standing our ground, standing up. It's fine to stand up for what you believe in, and we need to make a stand. And it needs to be activism, spiritual activism, and action. So we don't want to hide behind some sort of passive spirituality and all is one. It's just two sides of the same coin and it's just duality. And you can easily, like I mentioned before, use these concepts as a philosophical, bypass. But it's tricky because, a lot of people are now, because of this polarization, and they're afraid of speaking out, afraid of being authentic, and understandable so, because people can, you can get hurt, even killed, God forbid, violence, physical violence, lose your job, all the projections and attacks. So it more and more disconnects us not only from each other, but from ourselves. So we live in a perpetual state of fear and are afraid to speak our minds.
Yeah. And I think the key thing with that is to find, those people. And even if it's a therapist or coach, not even, but, sometimes we need to literally hire someone to play that person in our life. And there's nothing bad about that, So we need to find relationships where we can connect and we aren't sent into a place of protection. If you share something vulnerable with someone and right away they get defensive, they get angry, they get aggravated, you're not going to find connection in that relationship. That person isn't able to regulate their nervous system in such a way that they can hold an opposite viewpoint, And a lot of us that doesn't click. We're always trying to connect with people. It's our parents or whoever in our family, and they're not wired for connection. So we have to be able to find people and facilitate those kinds of relationships where we can actually have that, because we do live in polarizing times. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because if you're going to go out, post something that's really speaking your truth, getting it out there, it may bring up fear in you because it's courage, right? You have to get into that state of fearlessness. You have to really amp yourself up to do that kind of stuff. But then you also need those kinds of relationships of connection in order to support you to do those kinds of things. And if you don't, it's going to feel incredibly scary. So if you're out there and you're listening, you're I really, I know I see through what's going on. I really need to speak my truth more. But I feel afraid to do so. Like the first question to ask yourself, like, do I feel supported in my interpersonal ecosystem that if I deal with some sort of conflict, I have someone to talk to. I have someone who can regulate me. I have someone who can, help me through that. And that's the way that we can actually become these kind of spiritual warriors, is by building those kinds of support systems.
And I feel the best way, in a sense, is actually doing that. What we're most afraid of is stepping into our vulnerability, because that's what I've noticed. In my life, also especially before I met you, I was a hermit. I was single for like a decade, living by myself in Topanga County, in my little hobbit hut, so to speak, like a hermit in the Santa Monica Mountains, and enjoying my solitude. But solitude can easily morph into isolation.
Yeah.
Right. And it's easy then to complain, the mind, the ego, the self, to get lost in self-pity. And then it turns into like internalized anger and projected towards the world. The world sucks. Nobody loves me. The world is shit. You get into a very nihilistic, negative worldview that you almost like let the world, end. I don't, hate it and whatnot. But that's like that anger. There's pain. There's sadness underneath it. When I learned my outlet was writings and infusing my personal process. And I noticed the more I shared my vulnerable process, even my own quote unquote faults, lessons, shortcomings, the more I would actually make genuine connections.
Yeah.
And that's the irony, huge. Because I was afraid that we all have our masks. We don't want to appear quote unquote weak. So we have an inauthentic image. We present ourselves differently to the outside world, as opposed to how we really feel. Right? Because we are afraid because of childhood wounds, for example. Because in childhood, for example, when we showed our hurt or true emotions, maybe our parents shut us down right away.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't mirror our emotions, didn't hold space for it. So you learned early on, I cannot be authentic. If I show myself how I really feel, I get punished.
Yeah.
I'll be talking down. So many of us carry this over into adulthood.
Yeah.
So that program had to overcome. And like you mentioned, it takes courage. And courage is really important to understand, acting with courage is not to say that there is no fear. As Don Juan from Carlos Castaneda would say, a warrior is not fearless, but a warrior acts with courage despite the fear. So you have only courage when there's fear. So it's like kind of almost ignoring the fear. Because fear, again, I've said this a few times before, in a sense is an illusion, because fear lives in time, meaning you're afraid of something that may happen in the future. It's time-based, right? Or when I do this, say this, we are afraid this might happen to me.
Or you're afraid of something that literally isn't happening.
Isn't happening, but it's something, it's like we make something up in our minds, basically, right? So in the present moment, it doesn't exist.
Yes.
And it is literally an illusion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
it's real to our body, though.
It's real to our body, exactly. And then to trauma responses and we stuff from the past coming up, we project into the present, which doesn't apply. So I had to really overcome this question, just like, no, I need to be vulnerable. And each time when even my writings, even nowadays, when I write something very personal, even the recent article I wrote about my father, it creates some sort of anxiety, some sort of oh my God, vulnerability, there's I'm opening myself up to the world. But then what I experience each time is the exact opposite of what I thought would happen, actually opens up more genuine connection, people approach me and open themselves up, because it's in a sense of what I call a positive trigger or inspiration. When you open yourself up more vulnerable, speaking from your authentic place, it inspires others to do the same. And you realize, oh my God, I can relate to you. I feel the same.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of how we can work towards creating more authentic connections.
Yeah, exactly. So if a lot of us, we weren't attuned to in childhood, we had to put on a fake mask, perform to be a certain way in order to be accepted. And then we learned to basically become the fake self, we need to train ourselves in this kind of vulnerability. And at first it is very uncomfortable. At first we're in a protective state. And I'll give an example with myself. 3 years ago, I moved to an intentional community. We had sharing circles, I don't know, multiple times a day there. But we had one that was really big, which is like an interpersonal sharing circle. So we all sit in a circle, we like pass around a stick, we just share whatever's going up for us. And I remember the first time I went into one of those circles, I had such intense anxiety, and then I just spoke and I let it flow. And like, I was so shocked, and everyone came up to me after and was like, oh my God, I really loved what you said. It was very moving, and I was so thrown off because I was in such a trauma response myself, and then as I did it more and more, I started to realize like, wow, this is actually teaching me how to be my true self around people, and teaching my nervous system that it's safe to do so, So a lot of us, especially if we're very isolated in our lives, like stepping out, like even in the group work we do, for instance, the group work is actually inspired by these kinds of circles that we do at retreats. So they did it this intentional community. And I know it's uncomfortable for people to share at first, and that's totally normal. But as you do it more and more, there's magic happening in your nervous system behind the scenes, because it's, as I said before, it's in a state of protection. So you're sharing, you're fearful, you're like, oh my God, what did I say? But then you realize like, wow, no one judged me. No one attacked me. No one got triggered. No one, that's what happens in the everyday world sometimes when we share ourselves. And then your nervous system learns to relax, and it actually starts to rewire itself because you had a different experience than what you were expecting. And that's really the magic of doing group work. As simple as it sounds, just like, all coming together to share your vulnerabilities and not having the worst case scenario that your nervous system is preparing itself for, just rewires it in a completely magic way, which is why, many different teachers, Peter Levine, Gabor Mate, they really talk about, this healing really happens in community, and that's what we're really starving for now. We were starving for it before this even happened. And now it just kind of kicked it up a notch.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's kind of like, right now, I don't know how it is in Arizona, but in many states, you can't even like go to church. Like, this is how people actually find this connection in like everyday, regular, quote unquote matrix life. They go to like their community, but for many of us, if we're not in like an organized religion or system or whatever, like we're kind of just like wandering around, So this is, I feel, the direction that we're going to be taking as in humanity, is we're going to be building new types of communities as well. That's what people are longing for. Like, how many people of you guys know someone who wants to like go to intentional community and grow their own food and like do all that? What they're longing for is community and connection at the basis. And you don't need to go off and become a farmer to do that.
Yeah. And like what you shared is interesting, because I can so relate to that, because it takes practice. It's like practicing muscle you never used, or, and rebuild this of communicating from your true self, from your, authentic self. I can very much relate to, years ago, even decades ago, when I started group work processing, I had so much anxiety. When came my turn, I was extremely self-conscious. I was speaking out of my head. It took time to relax into myself and speak from my true self, from my authentic self. So really, in a nutshell, when we talk about finding connection in times of isolation, before we can find true connection, what we're truly longing for to others, ask yourself the question, how are you connected to yourself?
Yeah.
Do you allow yourself to be completely authentic, sincere within yourself, and speak, your truth? And when I mean your truth is not just this like whatever self-righteousness beliefs you have about the world, but your truth is your authentic self, including all your vulnerability, all your issues, whatever it may be, your shadow, all your shit, so to speak.
That's the key thing.
And allow yourself to speak it, and not trying to appear as perfect or right all the time.
Yeah.
Because I know for myself, even my work, I have certain views, beliefs, understanding, ideas, and knowing, but I also know that I do not know. Like seeking truth, it's a process, and I have to keep this in mind. Just like anybody else, I also do have my biases. Everybody has a bias, right? Nobody's omniscient, enlightened, unless you are, then you have no I identification anyway. But it's a process, right? It keeps changing, continuing. So we need a sense of humility as well. But ultimately, it's about being authentic to yourself. And this authenticity comes from really showing up and not, on some level, like not caring what other people think. Well, that's easier said than done, because we do care, obviously. We want to be received. We want to be loved, right? But, when you're truly authentic to yourself, of vulnerability, what happens, you will find amazing support of people, right? You didn't expect that from. And anybody who really holds that against you or puts you down for that is also a great way to clean out connections or relationships that are truly not good for you.
Yeah.
Because then it's also important to make the boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, and also maybe you can touch upon this, because when we speak of vulnerability and sharing, it's also important not to, you know, it can be very vulnerable because, you know, depending who we share to, and there can be such a thing as oversharing. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's mostly important, and a lot of us don't really have this skill wired into our nervous system, is being able to tell the safe people that we can share with, you know? And for us to do that, we actually have to be attuned to ourselves and attuned to the other person. Because a lot of us, because we're stuck in our heads, we actually don't. We may feel in our nervous systems kind of like anxious or like uncomfortable around someone, you know, but our mind will like make a justification why. It will override what the signals of our body is telling us. But you can't fake that. Like when you're around a safe person, for the most part, there's exceptions to this. You will feel more grounded and calm. Those are the traits of like a good therapist or anyone who you're working with, right? Like they ground you, they calm you down.
It's like an X factor. It's not something you can actually learn at school. It's something almost it relates to your level of being, you know?
Yeah, it relates to your own embodiment too, which is definitely not something they teach in most schools. But then the other thing too, and the caveat to that is, so if we're wired for protection, a safe person may register as danger to us. So it's also important that we really understand our nervous systems and how trauma impacts our nervous system, so that we can actually use the neocortex, the rational mind, for what it's good for, which is being able to be like I'm experiencing an exaggerated fear response, even though I know this is a safe person, you know, and you have to be able to override that program. And that's what you kind of did in your...
That's where the courage comes in.
Yeah,
right?
That's what you did when you were sharing in your communities for the first time. That's what I did, you know. And so that's where, you know, the courage comes in. So instance, like a good example, if you're listening to this podcast, you're like, wow, I really feel drawn to do like group work with Bernhard and Laura. But at the same time, oh my God, I've never shared. I've never opened up to myself. I just listened to these podcasts, you know. Your neocortex has to be able to override that fear response to be able to put you in the situation so that you can have a new experience, and then it can rewire your nervous system.
I think that's where also let's say the male aspect of consciousness comes in, the warrior self, the will, like using willpower.
Yeah. Right.
Third chakra, kind of like self-empowerment, to just, sometimes you need to push through, right? Yeah. To use the vital force, the life force, the will to like, no, I'm going to do this.
And to reason too. Like you can...
using our mind actually to our own advantage.
Exactly. And we really need this connection to heal our trauma. And this is what's going on. Like, whether you believe in the official story or not, what we're experiencing is registering to many of us as a trauma. Our lives suddenly went one way, were one way, they changed into another for many of us. For some of us, those were good changes. For many of us, those were, you know, we lost our jobs or relationships or whatever. So we're all going through, to some extent, some trauma. And if we're not personally, other people around us are. So we really need this kind of connection to bring ourselves to a sense of safety and groundedness again. And so in times like this, it's almost like there's been extra barriers in the way of doing that. So right now, if all we have is like doing Zoom, that's actually fine. You know, it's better than just, you know, being an island to yourself and just reading Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you know, social media or Twitter, you know, because at least you're still connecting to others. You know, you feel that support system. So then, you know, if like, you know, if you're freaked out about something, you have someone to talk to. These are resources you can use to regulate yourself.
Yeah. Exactly. So, you know, but, you know, there's a big lesson. For example, I learned like also a lesson of compassion. Sometimes, you know, we are upset at others not opening up emotionally, and they're up in the heads and, you know, and all of that. And my big lesson was, with my own father, which I wrote an article about. I don't know if you guys maybe have read it. I released it recently. It's called Freedom, USA, and the Story of My Father, a lesson in history. And in a nutshell, it kind of describes my dad's escape from Eastern Germany, right? Which he just, at the age of 83, wrote a book about. And just in a nutshell, because when I was growing up, I had a very distant relationship to my dad. He was not emotionally present. He didn't show up in the way I needed him to show up, right? He was very aloof, disconnected, kind of just occupied with his work, very intellectual. And I was craving a more emotional connection, right? Something like I could never, like man talk, for example, anything like that. And I held it against him. I had resentment towards him.
Yeah.
Right? I blamed him for him and all of that.
Yeah, because you had a genuine need there.
A genuine need. It was not meant, right?
Exactly.
As a child. And almost like an invisible father, so to speak, right? But now to my own process and learning about trauma, wounding, and all of that, what's happening, my own process and working with many others. And now my dad, finally after... at his age of 83, he was confronting his own trauma because he was born at the beginning of World War II in 1937 and then grew up in Eastern Germany, which is socialist Germany, communist Germany before the wall broke down. And he escaped with his family jumping off a ship, which first failed. He got imprisoned in Eastern Germany with his parents by Stasi and KGB agents. He was in prison for almost a year before a lawyer was able to get them out to Western Germany. But he blocked this whole experience out because it was extremely traumatizing. And then he dissociated from it, and hence he could not tap into his own emotional intelligence. And wherever we have trauma and wounding and this kind of disassociation, we cannot be fully present. We cannot be, we're not fully, we cannot be fully present with others because we're not present with ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where the compassion comes in. A lot of people who we're like yearning this connection from, even from our family, our parents, or friends, they may be dealing with trauma or wounding they're not even aware of, and you're not fully aware of.
A lot of us are seeking connection from people who it's not even available to them.
Exactly.
And so we're continuously trying to get our needs met by these people who don't have that option. That's not how they relate to themselves. Their nervous system isn't even in that place, especially if someone's very high anxiety or very depressed, hypervigilant or very checked out. They don't have that available to them. That's its own trauma state. You see it even wired in the nervous system. Like in order to actually get into the social engagement system, we need to get into the healthy aspect of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so a lot of, at least when I go out in the world, it's very rare to see someone who rests in a calm, collected, grounded state. But that's why we want to become those people. That's how we can actually, regardless of where we work or what we do, if we become those people, we become like a healing force field for everyone around us who didn't have that as well. Yeah,
exactly. And that's, again, going back to the ultimate question or the topic of this podcast, finding connection in times of isolation. There's so much happening in the world right now, and we purposely didn't want to get right now into all the specifics of what's happening in the world, the craziness, the polarization, but it's all part of it, right? But it's also, again, I have to point it out, it's an opportunity, right? There is a silver lining, right? There's something happening in the world. It brings up a lot of stuff in the world and within ourselves, and it's material for transformation to burn through the alchemical fire. And more, it seems to be some sort of like, as I said before, there's the artificial divide and conquer frequency by the matrix of polarizing humans against humans. But at the same time, there seems to be a natural splitting or diversion, happening as well. And I think we had a podcast around that as well, timeline reality split. But that also needs to be honored, right? To let go of relationships that don't work anymore.
Yeah.
Right? If our beliefs, if we're so... It's too idealistic to believe, why can't we just get all along, all the Biden and Trump supporters? It doesn't matter, have a happy, unification party. That's completely unrealistic, right?
Yeah.
So it's also honoring differences and being able to make boundaries, right? Without letting affect us and not forcing a connection when it's simply not happening.
And it also takes, in order to have a good relationship with someone who has a different belief system than you, it takes a certain level of emotional maturity. You have to really like a lot of us are very attached to our ideas. Like, I'm right. This is what I believe. Anyone who thinks otherwise is wrong. And I think it's really great to just create some space around that, like, this is what I believe, in this moment, but I'm also open to being wrong as well. And that kind of open-mindedness as well can help facilitate more open relationships.
Isn't that what Marianne Woodman called holding the tension of opposites? In a sense, like that's holding like the darkness and the light, and just kind of like is holding your divine self and your human self. It's somewhat related, but really like there's, in order to have those kinds of relationships of unification really get along, you have to have people whose like bodies are not threatened by someone who's different to them. And to be honest, what I see in the world even before this is a lot of people's nervous systems respond to the outer world as if it's a threat. And that's just a state, because we live in this crazy, like, left brain, hyper anxiety, go, go, go world. That's had an impact on our nervous system. We were already dealing with this, and now it's amped up, But what I do notice, bringing back to the thing I said again and again, if you learn the things that get you into a parasympathetic nervous system, the social engagement system, where you feel connected, grounded, present, like for me, it's definitely like meditation, yoga, taking baths. I do a lot of things to down-regulate my nervous system. If you become that person, then you become like a force field, and then people start being drawn to you. And these people, they're the kind of people that you want to be friends with because they're truly interested in connection, But when we're in a state of protection, we just meet more and more of the same. So if you're in a fear state and you go out to the grocery store, and you're going to be surrounded by more people who are in that state because your nervous systems literally impact each other. Not only fear state, but also if you're in a state of annoyance and fuck these people, they're all wearing masks. God damn it, I got to deal with this shit again.
Yeah.
Then it's also kind of like you're in that frequency.
For sure. Yeah.
But ultimately, want to close the first hour again, finding connection in terms of isolation. Ultimately, it always comes back around to this. What is the ultimate connection? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And that's to the divine, to God.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the most important relationship. And I think that's the most important lesson we can take out of it, because most people only turn to God, the divine, if they're completely suffering, lost, isolated. Then when people start praying, I remember your story when you were, similar to me. Mm-hmm. But that's the ultimate lesson, to understand that the only true connection we can only have on that level is to God and the divine within ourselves, And once we have that established, and I'm not meaning this from an abstract level, it's very, that's an inner experience, and it needs to be a certain sincerity and aspiration to the divine. We're not talking about some religious God outside in the sky.
It's your like,
it's
your
ourselves.
own like heart. Like it's how I experience on a physical level is my own heart has a connection to my soul, and that connects with something infinite, and that refills me. Because the truth is like every single human relationship you have is going to be imperfect, but the relationship that will be perfect is your connection to the divine. And if you can use that as a secure attachment, basically, then that's the ultimate. Because from that place, like if I depend on all the relationships around me to make me happy, then ultimately they're going to fail me one day. It's just the reality. They're going to die, the worst, eventually, or, it's just not going to work out. But that's a relationship that will always be perfect. That's your ultimate. If you have no secure attachment, that's the ultimate secure attachment. But I also just want to put a caveat, but that's also, to not use that as an excuse to be isolated from other people, which is also what I did.
Well, that's then the trap of the aesthetics. You know what I mean? You just have this abstract connection to the universe or God.
Oh, for me, it wasn't abstract.
No, I'm saying
like,
people use it as an excuse.
Yeah. Like just to give an example, like, so I spent like some time in India and some time in Peru, and I actually was pretty good at like connecting to, like bliss, like higher states of consciousness. But I did it at the extreme cost of my human relationships. So I was very like, you could just also call it a phase, because maybe it was a necessary phase. I needed to focus on that for a while, but there was an extreme imbalance there. So I was just going to ashrams, meditating, doing spiritual work. And then my human relationships, I was like, just like basically like I hate to say it, but like disabled, basically. Like I didn't know how to do it. So we need to also be aware, because that can be a very seductive spiritual bypass to avoiding relationship.
Not to use it as escape. And the way I can describe it myself, like once my deeper call, there was an inner call from a Sri Aurobindo called a psychic being made its presence, this yearning for unification with the divine. And it happened then this more sincere aspiration of prayer and just like this intention to, connect to the divine, bring the divine down, connect to the divine mother. And it's nothing abstract, but what I've noticed, the more sincere would do that in my practice and in everyday life, right? Then my relationship started to change. And I saw through the crust, and so actually start more seeing the divine in all. And ironically, once I was trying to look for people or even a partner to connect so desperately and focus more like, who am I? Where's the divine in myself? Who is the divine, right? Called in that, in a sense, and connected to that. And I let go of finding that person, you came into my life.
Same.
Once I really sincerely aspired to the divine, and then it's like, it's written all over the scriptures, even the Bible, seek the kingdom within first, and then all the doors will be open to you. And there's truth to that.
Oh, there's immense truth to that. And that takes intentional, work. It takes, like, for me, it was like prayer, yoga, meditation. And then I also started to spiritual bypass. So I had to put self-work on top of that. Because really, if we don't have that connection within ourselves this is what's really going to get you through this craziness, is by fostering that connection. Because I see it through this astrological lens. We're dealing with a very 12th house time, and the 12th house is a house of isolation, spirituality. It's also a house of mental illness, insane asylums, a whole bunch of stuff is addictions, and this is all what's happening in people's lives as they're kind of falling apart. Ultimately, what's happening, through this kind of forced self-isolation, is we're dealing with this kind of we're kind of like the yogi we're going away to the cave, being put in our house. This is a really great opportunity to do spiritual work. I actually think that on the highest level, that's what the divine is giving us, being like, hey, slow your lives the hell down and go within and learn how to more access the yin side of being, which is definitely something that's become very imbalanced in the Western world. So this is the really great time to do that kind of work, and then also on doing this kind of work in community can also be even more powerful as well, because as we're reconnecting to our true self, we have these relationships where we can actually express that true self to. A lot of us are going through major personality changes, belief systems are changing. Who we thought we were is changing because we've been confronted with a lot of things happening in the world that have made us have to investigate our belief systems, right? And because that's happening, those shifts are happening, the relationships, the systems around our lives are going to change as well. So we need to be able to seek that relationship within, but don't be afraid of stepping out and seeking those relationships externally. Because if you just wait in your house, the chances of somebody knocking on your door are very low. You're most likely going to have to take some steps towards that.
Yeah. So with that being said, we will talk about more of that in the second hour. Really give you, get more maybe practical practice and tips how to do this in everyday life, especially in aspiration to the divine and creating relationships and work through your own inhibitions. And I also want to talk about the, big talk about the Great Awakening, which especially, this very mysterious figure Q talks about. But I want to expand on that from a much bigger, because there is a great awakening happening, and everybody plays a role. So I want to expand on that in the second hour.
And there is unity happening as well, too. So anytime we're dealing with one side of the polarity, intense division, we're also seeing unity happening on the other side.
Exactly. So I want to bring that topic in again. In the second hour for members. If you're not already a member, you can sign up at veilofreality.com. That's my website. And it will also give you access to all the podcasts, all the second hours, and the membership forum. And again, if you guys are interested of quote journeying with us, with Laura and I, in our next embodiment, soul embodiment, 8-week course, online course, We accept applications now. It only goes by applications. We take a maximum of 25 people on this journey. And it starts December 15th until February 5th. And to apply, go to awakenapply.com. And we see you guys in the second hour.